of course, this is all unwritten, but are there characters that absolutely have to be base roster? Otherwise, you're going to have big issues. And this whole, I would say, still emerging concept of DLC supported or extended support fighting games is interesting because you got to balance your community expectations, keep people happy. You got to balance your business needs and desires. And there's a lot of different ways you could go about this. Like, who do you save? Who do you launch for the grand opening? And do certain characters, because of their identities or personalities or the relationships that they have with the community, do they only fit in certain places? We had a conversation on a previous segment about the characters who would for sure be on the launch roster of the next Street Fighter. We'll call it Street Fighter 6. Not officially called that. Whatever. But those were Luke, because of all the messaging that Capcom has done directly about him, and then Chun-Li and Ryu. And the reason for Chun-Li and Ryu, outside of the obvious that like they're super popular, was because way back in 2015, little company called Event Hubs did an interview with then Capcom employee Matt Dahlgren talking about Street Fighter V, which is coming out the following year. And he quoted to us in talking about the construction of SF5's roster: "The way we're handling our reveals, we started off with the first characters that are mainstays. Ryu and Chun-Li will be in every Street Fighter game." Okay, makes sense. And it sounds to me like, well, that doesn't mean that they're not going to necessarily be base roster or that they're not going to necessarily be DLC. But you think about that and you go, well, if those characters aren't on your base roster, is there an expectation that people would want to see them there and then freak out and have a big issue with stuff? And sure enough, when we talked about Ryu and Chun, we didn't talk about Ken being there. We didn't specifically say Ken would be part of that non-negotiable, you can't be DLC, you have to be base roster group. And the people in our comments, very calmly and respectfully, said, dude, Ken has to be there. If Ken's not there, it's a big problem. And so that got me thinking, it's like, are there, of course, this is all unwritten, but are there characters that absolutely have to be base roster? Otherwise, you're going to have big issues. And this whole, I would say, still emerging concept of DLC supported or extended support fighting games is interesting because you got to balance your community expectations, keep people happy. You got to balance your business needs and desires. And there's a lot of different ways you could go about this. Like, who do you save? Who do you launch for the grand opening? And do certain characters, because of their identities or personalities or the relationships that they have with the community, do they only fit in certain places? And, this is really important. It's been important for a lot longer, even, I would dare say, than when this whole DLC thing has been going on for like the last 5 or 6 years or so. Capcom has dropped the ball a few times in the past when it comes to like initial rosters and such. And John, you bring this up every so often, either on the podcast or in our just private Event Hubs meetings and such. So I wanted to turn this over to you a little bit. 2 times in the past, back when Capcom did not do so well with an initial roster, and that cost them dearly.
Yeah. Well, the two examples are, of course, Street Fighter 3 and then Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. In Street Fighter 3, there was a point in development where this is rumored that Ryu and Ken were both not in the game. Some people dispute that and say, Ryu was always there. Ken was the one who they kind of threw in a little bit, not last minute, but kind of, so believe as you will there. But, the proof is that Street Fighter 3 was one of the least successful Street Fighter games ever. And a big reason for that is just like they took some of the most iconic characters in video games and didn't even have them in there. What was it? Wreck-It Ralph like had Zangief and M. Bison in there. Like, I mean, there's just characters that are like, these are iconic beyond belief kind of characters in fighting games. They're some of the most popular IP. And it's like, why would you not use them?
If they've appeared in Wreck-It Ralph, that's when you know they've made it.
Exactly. But anyway, so like I personally look at characters like Zangief and Dalsim and think they have to be there. I know, of course, we're going to get into selections later on, but there's certain characters who are just kind of like so iconic, they just kind of have to be on there. And if you don't have them there, like, what are you doing?
Right.
I know with Marvel Infinite was mostly like the X-Men characters were missing, and some others that were kind of like just kind of mainstays of the Marvel versus Capcom universe. But basically any character where you think they are the definition of Street Fighter, definition of this game, and they're not there. It's like, what are you doing? And Ken definitely falls into that for me. It's like, if Ken's not a base roster character, better be a damn good reason for it.
Well, and then and one might argue, you could say that Capcom even did argue at one point that people just want representation of types of characters, aka functions, and it goes very well beyond that. I don't mean to bring that up to poo-poo on Combo Fiend. He's a great guy, and I think he does a great job at what he does. Well, and Capcom said functions, that people only want the functions of their character. They don't necessarily want Magneto. They want a character that plays like Magneto. No, they want Magneto. And this doesn't apply to every character. I think that there are certain archetypes where, yes, the functions argument would work. But for certain characters, that just does not fly. And it would be in Capcom's best interest to know exactly who those are going in here to Street Fighter 6 or whatever, and not mess around with that. They got to know what their non-negotiables are. And
a quick point of that, Capcom failed to get the licensing rights for some of these characters, and Marvel didn't want them to do some of these characters, and that's how come they didn't show up. And that was Capcom's basically excuse for it. That came down from high up the ladder. That, hey, this is the reason that we're going to say that these characters aren't in here, and this is the excuse you guys need to give, that these characters are basically functions, and do it this way. A lot of the messaging and other stuff that surrounds Capcom fighting games, it comes down from pretty far up the chain in terms of a chain of command, and they like everyone to be on the same page regardless of how you feel as an individual. They want the messaging kind of consistent across their team. So I wanted to fill that blank in there, because a lot of these guys and gals get put up there with the job of leaving unfortunate messaging for the community to respond to.
No one wants to be that messenger, for sure.
No.
But hey, is what it is.
They get shot.
Yeah. I mean, whoa, okay. This is Mortal Kombat territory. I guess I should talk about Melina and her fan base right now, as she was a DLC character that didn't get introduced for a while, and that was problematic for Ed Boon and his team. Like every time they brought anything up, in fact, I think anytime Ed Boon tweeted anything, like, hey, I'm enjoying my Sunday afternoon, there was a bunch of not so, PC commentary on his tweets about how they needed to put Melina in the game ASAP. So before we go any farther, though, I want to ask you, I'll give you my opinion as well, and then I also want to ask the listeners and the viewers to comment, do you think that Ken is part of this non-negotiable, you have to have him in as one of the first three character, or as part of the base roster, I should say, along with Chun-Li and Ryu as a non-negotiable, or do you think that you could have Ken as a DLC character? Because he would sell, everyone would buy Ken. But if you did that, would people be more preoccupied with this should have been part of the base roster and it's still an issue, and ultimately it's still a bad look for Capcom and a bad talking point for their game? So, basic question, is Ken part of this non-negotiable group? John.
Yes, I think so. It's the thing about it is, fighting games is the Shoto moveset that they have is the most copied moveset in fighting games, even among Capcom themselves, and people just love that moveset and expect to be able to play multiple characters who play in that way. Ryu is not enough. You need Ken in there as well, or another Shoto to replace that. You could argue Luke or whatever, but no, it's Ken has to be a non-negotiable in my opinion.
And you agree with Chun-Li and Ryu as well?
Of course, okay. Yeah. They're going to be in every Street Fighter game.
Absolutely. And the people, you do your comment. Let us know if you think Ken is part of that. Those of you that didn't already say as much in previous videos. And also, if you're doing that, you might as well also Psycho Crush the like button, because that really helps us out. But yeah, I agree. And I want to kind of evolve things over now into, are there any other non-negotiable characters, which it sounded like you already have at least two that you think are.
Okay.
Well, yeah. I just want to set the stage a little bit and say that I think this conversation of what we're about to have would be very different had we had it before 2016 played out, because there were characters that I would think like Guile, Balrog, Sagat would probably be in this category, and yet they ran the experiment. Those were DLC characters, and people were just fine with it. Street Fighter V was ultimately a success, around 6 million units sold. It had its rocky patches, but it's become good, and these characters were DLC, and it wasn't an issue. It certainly wasn't a death blow kind of an issue. So that opens my eyes up, and I go, wow, there's actually a lot of tolerance here for characters to be DLC, but I just wanted to throw that out there before we jumped into it. John, do you think there are other characters that absolutely have to be on the base roster that cannot be introduced later on as DLC?
Yeah, I mentioned Zangief and Dhalsim, and the big reasons there is you need those archetypes represented. It's not just, from a filling standpoint. This is also from there's a lot of things to look at, in my opinion. But the things about Zangief and Dhalsim is like the grappler and long range zoner archetypes. Those are the two characters who kind of built those archetypes up in fighting games. And yeah, you could bring in some other characters to fill those roles. But why would you? They are the two most representative characters, and they tend not to be super popular anyway, like in terms of usage and stuff. So I don't think that they make as much sense as DLC as they do on the base roster. Like, give people those characters from day one. And one other throw in here, and yeah, Bias, she's on my cup and everything like that. But
Where'd you get that cup? That's a really nice cup.
It's one of my friends got it for me for Christmas. So, but this is actually a new cup. It's a larger one. My wife got this one for me, and it's got the sass back on it, which I'll explain another time. Rose would be the other throw in here because she's really integral to the plot of what they're planning on doing in this next game. And I think that if she's not near the start of the release of the game, like, what are you doing? And there's a few other throw-ins I'd mention, like, I think almost Cammy, like, I wouldn't say she's a non-negotiable, but like, she makes a lot of sense on that base roster. And then I also think you've got to bring someone back from Street Fighter V on the base roster, and like someone like Karen, like, makes a lot of sense. But Luke is in there as well, so who knows? But there's a few characters that are just kind of like, they make so much more sense as a base roster member than they do as DLC. And there it is.
Yeah, I do appreciate the argument that characters like Dhalsim and Zangief, they're certainly, they've got their places at the table. How hyped do they make? Like, they're people that love those characters for sure, but widespread love, I don't know. And like, from a business standpoint, is Dhalsim going to get a ton of downloads? Maybe he would, but maybe he wouldn't. Dhalsim might be one of those characters. Zangief might be one of those characters for the people that go like, I don't really play grapplers. I might be able to skip this one, and so that might be a thing that you would consider. But as far as and how I sort of set this up with, like, will the community say no dice, like, you can't do it this way, and we are going to revolt or not buy your game, or Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite you? I don't think that anybody beyond Ryu, Ken, and Chun-Li actually falls into that category. I think, and it's like, could you do it without Cammy? It's like, oh, yeah. M. Bison. M. Bison's an interesting one that ultimately I think it'd be fine, but he might be one where it's like, you kind of got to give him a certain level of respect, and if you don't put him on the base roster, then you don't put him in DLC either. It's like these weird, I don't even know that would be the case, but when I think about him, I think like people might have a crazy reaction like that, but ultimately I couldn't.
Bison's the deadest he's ever been now.
Means nothing.
Like, he's died a lot. Yeah. But he's going into Street Fighter 3 now. That's the territory we're entering, and so there's actually a really good reason not to have Bison in there.
Sure.
Now, you could have Phantom Bison or whatever, which is fine. What are they, undead?
Sure, adjective Bison or something, and have them a little different, play with the character.
Yeah. And they'll go back in time and stuff, so there's a reason to put them in there. But there's
Nice
actually
Bison.
a very good reason. Yeah. There's a good reason not to have them in this time. So
yeah, for sure. Well, there is one character that stands apart from everybody else that I want to talk about specifically. But before we get to that character, I have a couple of
Bitch ass rage quitters
of the week. We'll keep this short and sweet, but there is a Mika player that I played named, I can't even read my own handwriting, Camerco89, who just totally rage quit out. And that was fine, is whatever. Like 2 days ago, I ran into a Seth player, Grandmaster, the purple one, Seth player, and their name was just, I think it was I think that's all it was. Beat me the first game handily and stunned me in the second round for the ending combo and taunted during that combo. Fair enough, you can do that if you want. We've talked about it plenty when Knuckle Dew was pulling that crap, and it's like, that's part of the game. Fair enough. If you want to be a jerk, you can. Next game, I updated and destroyed him, and as the end was happening, he rage quits out. Worst kind of player. Shame on you. You suck. You are the biggest bitch-ass rage quitter of this week.
Bitch ass rage quitters
of the week.
We give you a thumbs down. Don't thumbs down the video. Thumbs down that player.
Yeah.
Because that guy sucks.
Yeah.
Guy, gal, they, them, whatever.
Idiot. Okay, so anyways, the character though that I find very interesting when it comes to this conversation is Akuma. Akuma is I don't even want to say low key, as low key like right there on the same level as Ryu, Chun-Li, and Ken, and you could argue that he's even higher in terms of how many Street Fighter games has he appeared in? Like almost all of them, I think all of them, and there have been a handful of there have been a few instances where there were Street Fighter crossovers where Akuma wasn't, but he's got his own crossovers, like he was the only Street Fighter character to appear in in X-Men Children of the Atom. There were no Street Fighter characters, but he was a secret final boss. He, of course, is in Tekken 7, the only Street Fighter representative there. There are a few instances where he's not around and someone like Ken is, like Super Smash Bros. But man, Akuma is all over the place. And if you look at how popular he is as a character, it's Ryu #1 on the CFN rankings that come out every month, but it's either Akuma or Ken who fight for second and third place all the time. So he's super popular amongst the general community that's playing Street Fighter V. You know that you see him more often competitively speaking than Ken, because he's a better character just through and through, and we've seen a lot more of Akuma than Ken or Chun or even Ryu for that matter in the competitive realms of both Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 5. This character is like going around he's not the face of Street Fighter, but Capcom uses him as like an ambassador all over the place.
Yeah.
He is massively popular in the realm of fighting games, and it's weird because he doesn't necessarily, like, you might not see him at like they do those like last suppers of certain genres and such, and you see like the most important characters and whatnot, like Ryu, maybe even Chun-Li would be in that. You wouldn't necessarily see Akuma except for maybe like lurking in the background as a hidden boss. But I would say Akuma would probably fall into this category, except that Capcom had him as DLC, the first character in Season 2 for Street Fighter V, and that was a whole year of DLC after the game launched. You had 6 other characters first, and people were absolutely happy and just fine to have Akuma come in later. Do you have a supposition as to why that is? Why it's okay that Akuma could be this kind of character?
He's always been a hidden character. His whole origins is that, and so if he's a hidden character, it makes sense to add him later, and that fits expectations. So much of doing business, marketing, all that kind of stuff is meeting people's expectations, hitting them, and it's like, hey, if we do it this way, if we do give our audience what they want, then they should be happy. Should be, not always, but should be.
It's exactly what I think too. Is that Akuma, the expectations surrounding him is that he is that secret boss. He's that character, like, okay, so his first major appearance, Street Fighter 2, as the secret boss. You're not getting, in order to unlock him, I don't remember all of the requirements, but I think you can't lose a round, right? Or something like that on the way of your arcade ladder. So when you're first playing these games, you're not going to access Akuma. Like the first month you're playing, you're not going to breeze through and not lose a single round. You're going to spend 45 minutes on Balrog and Sagat and Vega and then 50 minutes on Bison, and it's just going to be a grind. But once you get to a certain level in the game, you unlock, and this is sort of in that same realm as like DLC, the game evolves further. Like once you've met a certain level and you can play at a certain level of efficiency, you get this new character that opens up a new part of the game, and that's really cool. Akuma has been that. He's been the secret boss that once you've met the requirements, once you're really like you're intermediate or farther along with the game, then you get Akuma. And for whatever reason, we talk about how he fits into like an acceptable top tier where other characters like, you don't want them to be the top tier. It's like, oh, I can buy it because of who Akuma is and who we've expected him to become. And so I think in a similar way, he's okay as he's fashionably late to the party. That's what he can be, and Akuma's allowed to do that. So even though he's amazingly popular, and I would say the only other one that's really in talks of that same realm as Ryu, Chun, and Ken, that's why it's okay for him. And so ultimately, I think that it's only those three, and that everybody else is fair game. Now, you're going to have a starting roster probably of like 20, 25 characters, so it's likely that you're going to see all of these types of characters and whatnot, and it won't be a huge issue. But I did want to just sort of buckle down and say, or kind of try to explore, where are communal expectations at? Why are they there? And ultimately, like, what can we probably see, and what would be catastrophic if we saw it roll out from Capcom for any future Street Fighter game? And there it is.
Yeah, as much as we give them crap about repeating the same mistakes over and over again, I mean, that happens sometimes, but it's on the more rare side, especially when they've had a major flop. I don't think, for example, you're going to see gyms coming back to a fighting game anytime soon.
Darn.
And they made great pains to separate the gems from the stones in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, for example. They're like, yeah, this is not gems, it's a stone, and it works this way. And so, yeah, you could say they kind of did a similar thing with Marvel Infinite, but they also had their hands tied a little bit with Marvel and how that was handled there. So it's not completely on them, but, it is still, Capcom making the game at the end of the day. So they've got to stand up and figure out how to do that stuff properly, and there it is. So this stuff, I'm hoping, they get up to the 20-man, 25-man roster. I think that's a really big deal in this. We're definitely going to put them on blast if they don't do that. But crossing my fingers and crossing my toes and hoping that they learn from this stuff and we get a really solid jumping off point here with Street Fighter 6 and what do they call it, the Cap God status or whatever. I know that, like, with the latest like Resident Evil game, Monster Hunter, Devil May Cry, all that kind of stuff, like their games are being fairly well received right now. And if they do that with this next fighting game, that would be amazing, because we have not had a well received game since what, John? Like, what was the last super well received game launch in fighting games from Capcom?
For Capcom? Street Fighter 4? I don't know.
Yes, that's the last really well received. Even Marvel 3 started off really rocky. It's been a long time since we had a really great launch for a fighting game. So I'm crossing my fingers and hoping, much like the Star Trek movies, right? Like where the what is it? The only the good ones. It's the even ones, yeah, that are good, right? I'm hoping the same thing with Capcom, because Street Fighter 3 and Street Fighter 5 have been fairly well cursed. So the even games in the series are the good ones. So Street Fighter 6, bring it on! It's an even game. We're gonna be doing good, and then don't have much hope for Street Fighter 7.